Why is the Jewish return to the Promised Land often called a second Exodus? And what made Nehemiah the Moses of his generation? How could Nehemiah, a humble cupbearer, rise to lead an entire people against hostile powers closing in on them? Stay with me until the end, because this is the truth. When God opens a new beginning, He doesn't just bring His people home. He rebuilds a strong wall right in front of enemies who tremble in fear. After years of exile, the people of Judah were scattered across foreign lands, carrying a quiet ache. Jerusalem, the city of God, had been left behind like a memory the world tried to erase. When they were permitted to return, it was no victory parade. Wind whipped across hills of blackened stone. Rubble lay at the foot of broken walls. Streets were scarred, homes collapsed, and families moved through ruins as a warning. A people can lose what matters most when they drift from covenant. That news reached Susa, the palace of King Artaxerxes. Nehemiah, the king's cupbearer near the throne every day, heard a report from brothers who had come from Judah. One sentence, "Jerusalem lies in ruins," cut him like a blade. He heard not only the sound of broken stones, but also the shame of his people, elders longing for the temple's glory, and children growing up without ever seeing their homeland. Nehemiah wept, fasted, and prayed. He confessed Israel's sin and remembered what God spoke through Moses. If the people turned away, they would be scattered, but if they returned to the Lord and obeyed His commands, God would gather them back to the place He had chosen. One day, as Nehemiah served wine, Artaxerxes noticed the grief on his face. "Why do you look so troubled? What is weighing on you?" Nehemiah trembled because in a royal court, sorrow could be mistaken for disrespect. He prayed silently, then answered, "May the king live forever. How can I not grieve when the city of my ancestors lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire?" The king asked, "What do you want?" Nehemiah requested permission to return and rebuild Jerusalem. He asked for letters of protection for the journey and timber to restore the gates, repair the walls, and secure a place for the guards. The king granted it and even provided an escort, as though a door opened at the moment prayer touched heaven. The journey took months. When Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem, he did not rush into speeches. He rested a few days, listened, and saw mothers waiting for water with babies in their arms. Then at night, he quietly rode along the broken wall. In places, debris was so thick the animal could not pass. He climbed down and let it through. He studied charred gates, measured weak points, and stored every detail in his heart. Before dawn, he returned, keeping his plan hidden, knowing enemies would strike if they heard too soon. When the time came, he gathered elders, priests, and people. He spoke plainly, "You see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem is in ruins, its gates burned. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, so we will no longer live in disgrace." He told them how God had strengthened him in the palace and how the king had approved his request. Hearts warmed. The people replied, "Let us rise and build." Work was divided by sections of the wall, often near each family's home, so everyone rebuilt what would protect the ones they loved. Each household repaired the section closest to them, so the wall rose from personal duty into a united work as one. Soon, the sound of hammers striking stone echoed through clouds of lime dust. Some restored the sheep gate, others repaired the fish gate, others reinforced watchtowers. Priests rolled up their sleeves. Craftsmen set down their tools. Shepherds laid aside their staffs. But enemies would not stay silent. Sanballat, Tobiah, and their allies mocked, "What can these weak Jews do? Even a fox could make that wall fall." Mockery became threats. They plotted a sudden attack to spark panic and stop the rebuilding. Fear crept in like a cold wind, but Nehemiah refused to let it freeze their resolve. He prayed and then organized watchmen. He stationed men with spears, swords, bows, and armor in exposed places, assigned guards by families, and told them not to abandon their posts. From that day forward, the people were ready for battle. One hand worked, the other held a weapon. Stone carriers wore swords at their sides. Mortar spreaders kept watch, ears alert. Nehemiah climbed to a high place and called out, "Do not be afraid. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons and daughters, your wives and your homes." He kept a trumpeter beside him. If the trumpet sounded, everyone would run to that point, because Nehemiah said, "Our God will fight for us." As the wall rose higher, new arrows came, letters, rumors, and traps designed to divide. Sanballat repeatedly invited Nehemiah to meet on the plain of Ono, pretending peace, but Nehemiah recognized the scheme to lure him outside the city and harm him. He answered with steady resolve, "I am doing great work and I cannot come down." Then another lie spread, that Nehemiah planned to make himself king and start a rebellion. Nehemiah exposed it as a fabrication and asked God to strengthen his hands. Inside the city, injustice flared. The poor were forced to mortgage fields and homes. Some even sold their children to pay debts. Hearing their cries, Nehemiah confronted nobles and officials, demanding they return what they had taken and stop charging interest. He reminded them they had been rescued from foreign oppression, so how could they enslave their own brothers and sisters? The leaders fell silent, then agreed to restore fields, vineyards, houses, and silver. Nehemiah sealed it with a solemn warning, shaking out his robe as a sign. Anyone who broke the promise would be expelled from the community. The rebuilding was no longer only about stones, it was about righteousness. As completion neared, Nehemiah rebuilt life within the walls. He appointed faithful men over the gates, ordered doors shut while it was still early to prevent infiltration, and called families to move back into the city, because a wall means little if the streets remain empty. Day after day, sweat soaked the ground beneath the scorching sun. Some nights they did not even take off their clothes, staying ready for danger. Hands shook from lifting stone, backs ached from dragging timber. Yet gaps closed, sections joined, and the line of the wall became whole, and they kept going. Then something happened no one expected. In 52 days, the entire wall was finished. When the news spread, surrounding nations were stunned. Their confidence collapsed like a torch in the rain. Everyone understood this was not merely human strength. The hand of God had been with them. But Nehemiah knew that stone walls are not enough if hearts remain in ruins. He organized the people, set gatekeepers and guards, established order, and protected the holiness of the city. Ezra gathered the nation at the square by the water gate. Ezra opened the book of the law of Moses and read aloud from morning until midday. The people stood listening. Some began to weep because they realized how far they had drifted from God's commands. They cried, "Amen, Amen," and bowed down in worship. The Levites explained the words so everyone could understand, because returning was not only returning to land, it was returning to the Lord. On the day the wall was dedicated, songs rose from the stone steps. 2 great choirs marched around the wall in thanksgiving. Cymbals clashed, harps and lyres rang out, and praise rolled over Jerusalem like a wave. From above, the city no longer looked like ashes. It looked like testimony. When a people humble themselves and come back to God, He can restore what seems permanently lost, not only a city's walls, but faith itself. Coming up next, Jonah and the Great Fish. Like and subscribe so you don't miss the next Bible story.